Good evening, welcome to my humble model railway, Bedstead Junction. Tonight we're going to be looking at a Hornby King. Now you might be looking at it and thinking, well, I've not seen one like this before, and you probably haven't because it's a unique one-off. Now I'll explain how I came by this. Now there used to be a train shop in Bristol. It was called Trains of Bristol. It was in Bedminster. It was run by a gentleman called Derek, and I believe he was working there with his son. Now, at the time, I wanted to get a Hornby King, or at least any sort of King really, in BR livery. And this was the only one that they had available. Well, I inquired about it, and he said, well, it's been modified by its previous owner. Of the alterations. In fact, when you look at King Edward I, which is this one is number 6024 King Edward I, the Hornby, standard Hornby version, it's got a single chimney, it's got different livery, different steam pipes as far as I'm aware. It's got Great Western on the tender. In fact, this one's got the early BR crest instead. So it has really been heavily customised, and probably what I would say is that this represents hours of work. Hours of work this person has put into this particular locomotive. I bought this in the early 1990s, probably 1991, 1992. And there's a lot of things that's added additions to it. It's got a separately fitted dart. I don't think it's got sprung buffers. I think the vacuum pipes have been changed. Handbrake levers have been added to the tender, I think, or new ones have been added maybe. It's just altogether a completely different locomotive than the standard King Edward I that was on sale from Hornby at the time. Now, it's got a Ringford motor and it's in the tender, and it's tender powered. Personally, I don't mind too much about it being tender powered. Some people might have misgivings about the locomotive being pushed around by the tender, but personally I don't really mind it at all, as long as the train runs well. That to me is the main thing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to give her a little run around the track, and we're going to have a little talk about the Hornby Kings as well, and possibly a little bit more about the model. Should we find other things to talk about regarding it. I mean, you can see from here actually it's a 460, and it's the largest of the 460s that were built for the Great Western Railway, and it was designed by Charles Benjamin Collett. Now, one of the reasons why these were designed was a kind of a, you can call it an arms race almost between the Great Western Railway and other railways. It was quite something at the time to be able to put in your publicity that you had the most powerful locomotive. Now, originally, the Southern Railway, which is one of the main rivals in the West Country to the Great Western, they had the King Arthur class. Now, they were very good locomotives, powerful, capable of excellent service, but that was actually trumped when Charles Benjamin Collett came out with the Castle. Now, the Castle class locomotive reigned supreme until the Southern Railway came out with the Lord Nelson class of locomotive, and that had a higher nominal tractive effort than the Castles. So not to be outdone, it was the go-ahead was given for the Kings to be built. Now, one of the other reasons why the Kings were built is that train loads were getting heavier and heavier, and so the demands on the locomotive were getting greater and greater. But if you bear in mind only 30 Kings were built, as opposed to, I think it was over 200 Castles, then you can probably draw the conclusion that maybe in a way the Castle was useful enough for the Great Western purposes. But these obviously stole the crown once again for the Great Western, and a lot of prestige was put on speed, and in fact there would have been a lot on the time it took, say for example, to go from Paddington to Plymouth, or from Waterloo to Plymouth. The Great Western went from Paddington, and the Southern Railway went from Waterloo. So the great rivalry between the Great Western Railway and the Southern Railway. Now, what we'll do is we'll run her out of the siding in just a moment. We'll see if we can do that now. I'm just going to check from here, see if I can see whether the points are set right. I think they are. So we're just going to back her out to the station, and we'll try and follow her along and keep in focus. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out ever so slightly. There we are. And then we can follow the locomotive out of the siding. Okay, so we're out of the siding now. And a slight bit of control issues there. That was self-inflicted by me coming out of there. And we're going to set the points to run forward. And then we're going to watch this Hornby King being put through his paces. So we're just going to move forward to change the point. Just one moment. Right, so we're just waiting for the right of way now. And off we go. Now see, it picks up speed nicely. Over that set of points without even the slightest hesitation. Very nice locomotive. Please forgive the coal looking a little bit grey. I think that's something which has happened over time. I'll probably have to clean it and maybe recolour it if I have to. But the actual locomotive itself has got I think it looks quite realistic in the way it is now. In fact, we're going to pardon me, we're going to bring her just up close now, so we can have a closer look. See what she looks like from the front and above. There we are. Now let's say one of the modifications which the owner made to this locomotive is he fitted a double chimney. The original Hornby King Edward I had a single chimney, and also I believe that they had a moulded dart on the front of the smoke box. If I'm wrong about that, then please forgive me, but this one's been fitted with a separately fitted dart to add to the realism. And also he's added a couple of lamps as well. So we're just going to move around slightly. We'll have a look at those lamps. See if we can get back into focus. There we are, we're back in focus again. So you can see the lamps which are fitted just underneath the smoke box there. You can see it's really been quite heavily modified. Unrecognisable from the original Hornby King Edward I. Now the Kings were eventually withdrawn in 1962, and that was because the western region of British Rail were switching over to diesel hydraulics, and they aimed to have purged their railway of steam locomotives by the end of 1965. That plan didn't entirely come off because the Somerset and Dorset Railway had fallen under Western Region control, and that had to carry on until March 1966 with steam power, because there was a problem with replacement buses. But that's a different story about the Somerset and Dorset. But really these were taken out of service in 1962, and then it would have been the replacement engines for this would have been the diesels, which would have been the warships and the westerns. But for many years, these would have been the premier locomotive of the Great Western Railway. And in fact, there's some in preservation, of course, King Edward I being one of them. Now let's put her through her paces. Just watch her go through past the camera there. He's putting his usual 3 Hornby coaches. That's really the maximum size train I can fit into the station in the present configuration I've got. We'll just follow her around now. Look at that, isn't that wonderful? Now I must admit there were times when the Ringfield motor in this was far more noisier than this. It's gone very quiet, so I added some additional oil to the gears on there. The Ringfield motor does comprise of a number of gears. Now there is something, you might be looking at something right down at the bottom right hand corner of the screen if you're distracted by it, so I do apologise. Well, that's something which is probably important, which I'll give a mention to in just a moment. Now you can learn a lot about the 460 Western locomotives from books, and I'm going to show you a book, or just the cover of the book, and it's a recommendation which I will give to you. We want to just now is the history of the Great Western 460s. And there's a dynasty of these particular ones. They began with the Saints class and the Star class, which were built by Churchward. Certainly for the express passenger locomotive we're talking about now. And then there was the Castle, designed by Charles Benjamin Collett. And also the King, which we can see going around the track now. Now here we are. We'll just zoom out a little bit and we'll turn the camera away to one side. Portraits of Western 460s. You see all the different ones there, but in fact they're all covered in here. You've got the Saints, the Stars, the Castles, the Kings. There we are, we're in focus now. Halls, Granges, Manors and Counties, they're all covered in here. Highly recommended book if you can get it. Brian Holden and Kenneth Leach. Now the book you're looking at right down the bottom, again I'll have to mention the book that's down there because someone's expressed an interest in this. Model Railways Unlimited. That particular book, I'll leave it down there. It looks like it's Ancient of Somerset. It's actually Branch Lines of Somerset, and that's by Colin G. Maggs. And someone expressed an interest in the Strawberry line. That's actually included in there. Okay, so that is a book that's highly recommended. We're just going to zoom back out again. And let's watch our King coming down towards us again. Now you can get hold of Kings. Obviously there's been models of Kings which have come out way after this one. So obviously we're talking about a locomotive which is at least 30 years old, I'd say. And it still goes fine. It did spend a long time up in the attic. This is one of my pre-lockdown purchases, like I say, from the early 1990s. And the only reason my railways went into hibernation, as I've explained before, is that it was through lack of space. And you can see in this particular room, I mean, this room is much smaller than the room I had in the previous house I was in. And there's very little space around even for this 6 foot by 4 foot layout. Now I don't know whether or not the double chimney modification was a homemade modification, or whether it was a part he could buy. You can definitely clearly see the double chimney there. Now the only addition that I made to this particular locomotive is in the cab. And it's my usual one. In fact, I did this many years ago, and we're going to pull the locomotive around so we can see what my contribution towards this, my little humble contribution. We'll see if we can get focus in there. I'll zoom right in again. There we are. I added a cab. You can see the driver and the fireman in there. Sorry, the crew to the cab. Okay, so that's a locomotive crew in there. The driver and fireman. I put the fireman in the pose of putting coal into the firebox there, and then the driver is reaching up to a particular control. I think he's got his hand on the regulator, if I remember rightly, or the reverser, let's say. Okay. So there we are. That adds, to me, that adds very much to the reality or the realism of a model, adding a crew. I know it's probably not everybody's cup of tea adding a crew, but I think for me at least, it's a worthwhile exercise. Now, as far as my pre-lockdown purchases were concerned, I brought all my locomotive stuff down in March of 2020 as the lockdown started to bite. And really, to be honest with you, I mean, most of my locomotives all worked perfectly well, considering they've not been in use for many years. And this one did. This one worked fine. I think the only two locomotives which failed on me was a standard class 4 by Bachmann, and that suffered from the infamous swelling wheels. Look that one up if you're not. It would be enough to put you off buying one. I got to be honest with you. The Bachmann class 4 of that vintage. I think I bought that in the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s. I don't know, but it was when I brought that one down, the mechanism locked up because the wheel centres were made out of some sort of funny nylon-y plastic stuff, and it actually swells and stops the motion from turning. You don't realise it until you smash the thing to bits trying to drive it. But there we go, that's what happened to mine. Mine all fell to bits. That's another story again. But this one went well, and also I got another one which I can be repairing, and that was an Airfix large prairie. I've got to try and get the motor running properly on that one again. But those were the only two locomotives really that failed to run from my collection that I spent many years in the attic. Now you can imagine this particular locomotive speeding away from Paddington and heading towards the West Country. Now, because of the size and weight of the locomotive, especially the weight, there were limits over which lines it can run. In fact, some bridges and viaducts, I think, had to be strengthened to be able to take these locomotives. But I think they only went as far as Plymouth. And I think really that the race between the Great Western and the Southern was to get to Plymouth first, or the quickest. Now the Great Western Railway took a route, either some detractors called the Great Way Round instead of the God's Wonderful Railway, which was via Bristol, and then across the Somerset Levels, and then through Bridgewater, down through Taunton, and onto the West Country. Whereas there was a diverting line built which saved a lot of time, which runs via Westbury, and then it joins the the old main line at Coglow Junction, which I think is near Taunton. But the Southern Railway, which was the rival to these Kings, they would go from Waterloo to Exeter Central, down through Exeter St David's, and then up towards Barnstaple, and they would go via Oakhampton down to Plymouth. So there was a bit of a race on to see which would be the quickest locomotives to get to Plymouth. I think what happened was a lighter engine would take over at Plymouth, so that the train could continue on its journey across the Royal Albert's Bridge and into Cornwall. I hope you found this video of interest. It's a relatively short one. I'm going to call it a day now. Keep it relatively short. And if you like what you see, press like and subscribe. And ring that bell if you want to see any videos in the future. Okay, I'm just concentrating on pointing the camera and trying to follow the locomotive round. There we go, it's following round now. There we are. Okay, one last look of it speeding round on its way to the West Country, carrying its trainload of happy passengers. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and good night. Thank you.